October 12th, 1944. The Belgian Ardennes forest lay shrouded in mist, the autumn chill penetrating the dense woodland as local resistance fighters moved like shadows among ancient oaks. Clara Jenkins, a former physics teacher from Philadelphia, now serving with the Office of Strategic Services, studied her pocket watch while calculating the tensile strength of the hemp ropes spread before her. The German patrol would arrive in exactly 3 hours, following the schedule they had maintained for the past 6 weeks. But what Clara and her team had planned would defy everything the occupying forces expected from resistance operations and change how military strategists would view the role of non-combatant specialists for decades to come. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how one woman's scientific mind and ingenuity would accomplish what an entire battalion had failed to do, revealing how innovation and intellect could overcome military might without firing a single shot, transforming not only the lives of 40 enemy soldiers, but also challenging the very foundations of wartime prejudice. Lieutenant Clara Jenkins had not expected to find herself in the muddy forests of Belgium when she had volunteered for service in early 1943. With a master's degree in physics from Howard University and 3 years of teaching experience at a Philadelphia high school, she had initially been assigned to administrative duties stateside. Her file noted her impressive academic credentials, her fluent French learned during a year studying at the Sorbonne, and her exceptional problem-solving abilities. What the file didn't explicitly state, but what every superior officer immediately noticed, was that she was a woman, and an African-American woman at that. "I'm telling you, Jenkins, these calculations won't hold under field conditions," Captain Thomas Whitley said, skepticism evident in his voice as he studied the diagrams spread across the makeshift table in their forest hideout. The resistance safe house, a small hunting cabin belonging to local resistance leader Marcel Dupont, smelled of pine and yesterday's stew. Theory is one thing, but when you're dealing with enemy soldiers in actual combat conditions, with all due respect, Captain, these aren't just theories, Clara replied, her finger tracing the detailed schematics. "I've tested these load-bearing calculations multiple times. The physical principles are sound. When properly implemented, this trap can immobilize at least 30 men without causing serious injury." Marcel Dupont, the 56-year-old former mathematics professor who now led the local resistance cell, nodded slowly. "She is right, Captain. I have checked her work myself. The science is impeccable." Captain Whitley sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. At 34, he had already seen action in North Africa, before being assigned to the OSS and parachuted into Belgium 4 months prior. His instincts told him to stick with proven combat tactics, but his orders were to explore unconventional approaches that might reduce casualties on both sides. "Fine," he conceded, "but I want a full demonstration before we even consider using this against actual enemy personnel, and I want contingency plans, multiple ones." Clara nodded, relief washing over her features. "You'll have them by tomorrow morning, sir." As Captain Whitley departed to check on the night's sentries, Marcel poured Clara a small glass of local apple brandy. "You know he is not a bad man," the Belgian said, his accent thickening as he relaxed. "Just traditional in his thinking." "Traditional is just another word for resistant to new ideas," Clara responded, though there was no bitterness in her tone. "I've been dealing with traditional my entire life." Marcel's eyes crinkled with understanding. "In my experience, the most traditional minds are often convinced not by argument, but by demonstration. Show, don't tell, isn't that what you Americans say?" Clara smiled, taking a small sip of the potent brandy. "That's the plan." The following morning dawned cold and damp. Clara had been awake since 4, making final adjustments to her designs and checking the available materials. The resistance had managed to collect nearly 800 meters of hemp rope from various sources, farms, fishing supplies, and even repurposed clotheslines. Additional materials included locally sourced timber, metal components salvaged from abandoned vehicles, and a surprising amount of bicycle parts contributed by villagers. Sergeant William Cooper, a towering man from Minnesota who had been a mechanical engineer before the war, approached with a steaming mug. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing her the coffee. Clara accepted gratefully. "Did you get those modified pulleys fabricated?" Cooper nodded. "Just like you specified. 18-millimeter diameter with reinforced axles. The local blacksmith worked through the night. I've never seen an old man so excited about making something that wasn't a horseshoe." "Monsieur Thibault understands what we're fighting for," Clara said. "His son was taken to a labor camp last year. The demonstration had been scheduled for 900 hours in a small clearing 2 kilometers from their base. By 7:30, Clara and Cooper had already transported most of the materials and begun preliminary setup. The design was ingenious in its simplicity, a series of interconnected rope mechanisms that, when triggered, would create a rapidly expanding network capable of ensnaring multiple individuals simultaneously. "You really think this will work on actual enemy soldiers?" Cooper asked as they worked, his hands deftly securing a complex knot. Clara paused, wiping sweat from her brow despite the morning chill. "The physics doesn't care who gets caught in it, Sergeant. If a human body of approximately 70 to 90 kilograms steps into the trigger zone, the reaction will be the same." Cooper chuckled. "Fair point. But I meant psychologically. These aren't training dummies we're dealing with. They're armed men who won't react kindly to being trapped. That's why the secondary and tertiary phases are crucial," Clara explained. "The initial capture is just part of the process. It's what happens in the following 30 seconds that determines success or failure." By 8:45, the clearing had been transformed. To the untrained eye, it looked completely ordinary, a peaceful forest glade dappled with morning sunlight. But hidden beneath fallen leaves, behind trees, and in the low-hanging branches, was an intricately designed web of potential energy waiting to be unleashed. Captain Whitley arrived precisely at 9, accompanied by Marcel and 4 resistance fighters, who would serve as test subjects. Clara could read the skepticism on the captain's face as he surveyed the seemingly undisturbed clearing. "Everything's ready, sir," she reported. Whitley nodded curtly. "Explain the procedure, Lieutenant." Clara gestured to the clearing. "The system has 3 trigger zones, each operating independently, but designed to complement the others. When activated, the primary mechanism will secure the subject's lower extremities while simultaneously initiating the secondary phase, which restricts upper body movement. The tertiary system then deploys to prevent any coordinated group effort to escape." "And you're confident this can be scaled up for the actual operation?" "Absolutely, sir. The mathematics accounts for up to 45 subjects, though I'd consider 40 to be the optimal maximum for this particular design." Whitley turned to the 4 volunteers, all local resistance members who had been briefed on their role. "You men understand what's expected? You'll enter the clearing as if on patrol, maintaining standard formation." The men nodded, their expressions a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. "Very well," Whitley said, turning back to Clara. "Lieutenant Jenkins, you may proceed." Clara positioned herself at the control point, a concealed location 20 meters from the edge of the clearing. From here, she could observe the entire operation while remaining undetected. She gave the signal for the demonstration to begin. The 4 volunteers entered the clearing, moving in the staggered formation typical of German patrols. Clara watched intently, counting their steps. 3, 4, 5. When the lead man crossed the invisible trigger line, Clara pulled the primary activation cord. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The forest floor seemed to come alive as ropes erupted from beneath the carpet of leaves, wrapping around the men's ankles and calves with surprising speed. The volunteers shouted in surprise as they found themselves suddenly immobilized. Before they could react further, the secondary system activated automatically. Additional ropes shooting upward to encircle their torsos and arms, effectively binding them in standing positions. "Now!" Clara called out, and Cooper triggered the tertiary mechanism from his position on the opposite side of the clearing. A complex network of ropes deployed from the surrounding trees, connecting the 4 captured men to each other and further restricting their movement. Within 15 seconds of the initial trigger, all 4 volunteers were completely secured, able to breathe and speak, but otherwise immobilized. Clara emerged from her position, clipboard in hand. Deployment time, 14.8 seconds. All subjects successfully restrained. No injuries observed. She looked toward Captain Whitley, whose expression had transformed from skepticism to astonishment. "My God," he muttered, approaching the captured men. He circled them slowly, examining the rope system from every angle. "And they can't escape from this?" Marcel, who had been observing from beside the captain, stepped forward. "We should give them the opportunity to try, no? That would be the most convincing demonstration." Whitley nodded. "Good point," he addressed the volunteers. "You men, do your best to free yourselves. Don't hold back." For the next 10 minutes, the 4 resistance fighters struggled against their bindings. They twisted, pulled, attempted to reach knots with their teeth, and tried coordinating their efforts to create slack in the system. Their exertions proved futile. Clara's design had anticipated every potential escape strategy, incorporating counterbalancing mechanisms that actually tightened the restraints when excessive force was applied. "Enough," Whitley finally said. He turned to Clara, genuine respect in his eyes for the first time. "Lieutenant Jenkins, I believe you've made your point. How quickly can this be deployed for a full-scale operation?" Clara couldn't suppress her smile. "We can be ready in 48 hours, sir." The real challenge began immediately. Scaling up the trap system from 4 subjects to 40 required not only additional materials, but also a completely redesigned deployment strategy. Clara divided the resistance members into specialized teams, each responsible for a different component of the operation. Cooper led the fabrication team, working with local craftsmen to create the necessary hardware, specialized pulleys, triggering mechanisms, and anchor points. Another team, headed by Belgian resistance fighter Elise Moreau, focused on rope preparation, measuring, treating, and configuring hundreds of meters of hemp into the precise lengths and strengths required by Clara's calculations. Marcel, with his mathematical background, worked closely with Clara on the scaled design. They spent hours hunched over maps and diagrams, calculating load distributions and trigger sequencing. The operation would require split-second timing and perfect coordination. "The patrol route has been consistent for 6 weeks," Marcel said, tracing the line on their map. 43 men arriving at the forest junction at approximately 1400 hours, then proceeding along this path toward the village. Clara nodded, making notes. "And we're certain they'll continue using this route. As certain as one can be in war," Marcel replied. "Their commander is methodical to a fault. Major Heinrich Streicher runs his unit like clockwork. Same routes, same times, same formations. The locals set their watches by his patrols." Captain Whitley joined them, placing a mug of coffee beside Clara's notes. "Intelligence from the village confirms that tomorrow's patrol will include Streicher himself. Apparently some general is visiting the regional headquarters, and Streicher wants to demonstrate how thoroughly he controls the area." Clara looked up sharply. "That changes things. If their commanding officer is present, they'll be even more alert than usual." "Or more complacent," Marcel suggested. "Streicher believes this area is secure. His men haven't encountered resistance activity on this route in over a month." "Because you've been deliberately avoiding it," Clara noted, "creating a false sense of security." Marcel nodded, a slight smile on his weathered face. "The art of preparation, mademoiselle." As night fell over the Ardennes, work continued by lamplight. The operation had been codenamed Athena's Web, Clara's suggestion, referencing the Greek goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. By midnight, the fabrication team had completed nearly 70% of the required components. Elise's rope team worked through the night, their fingers raw from handling the coarse hemp. Clara allowed herself only 3 hours of rest before resuming work at dawn. The operation was scheduled for 1400 hours, leaving precious little time to complete preparations and deploy the system. By 700 hours, teams began moving equipment to the target location, a narrow stretch of forest path where the German patrol would be most vulnerable. The chosen site offered several tactical advantages: dense tree coverage for concealment, solid ground for secure anchoring, and natural bottlenecks that would channel the patrol into the capture zones. Clara had divided the path into 3 consecutive sections, each designed to trap approximately 1/3 of the patrol. "Remember," she instructed the deployment teams. Timing is everything. Once the first section is activated, we have exactly 12 seconds to trigger the second, and another 12 for the third. Any longer, and we risk the rear elements escaping or having time to respond offensively. The morning hours passed in a blur of activity. By noon, the system was nearly complete, with resistance fighters concealed at strategic positions throughout the forest. Clara made a final inspection of each section, checking tension levels and trigger mechanisms. Everything had to be perfect. Captain Whitley found her making final adjustments to the primary trigger. "Engineering team reports all systems operational," he said. "Marcel's scouts confirmed the patrol left their barracks on schedule. They should reach our position in approximately 90 minutes. Clara nodded, wiping her hands on a rag. "We're ready, sir." Whitley studied her face for a moment. "You know, Jenkins, when they assigned you to my team, I thought it was some headquarters joke. A female physicist in a combat operation? I couldn't imagine how that would work." He paused, a hint of a smile breaking through his usually stern expression. "I'm not too proud to admit when I'm wrong." Clara returned his smile. "Thank you, sir. Though, to be fair, I never expected to be designing giant rope traps in the Belgian forest either." As the hour of the operation approached, tension mounted among the resistance fighters. They had positioned themselves in concealed locations throughout the area, ready to secure the captured German soldiers once the trap was sprung. Clara, Whitley, and Cooper occupied the primary control position, a camouflage dugout overlooking the first section of the trap. "Patrol approaching," came the whispered message, passed from sentry to sentry until it reached the command position. "Estimated arrival in 5 minutes." Clara checked her watch, and then the triggering mechanism one last time. Everything was in place. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach, not fear, but the acute awareness that came before putting theory into practice. This was no laboratory experiment or classroom demonstration. Real lives hung in the balance. "I count 42, whispered the forward scout. "Standard formation. Stryker is in the middle of the column." Whitley nodded. "Perfect. Just as expected." He turned to Clara. "Lieutenant, this is your operation. Give the commands when ready." Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. Through the foliage, she could see the German patrol approaching, a column of field-grey uniforms moving with practiced precision through the forest. They maintained proper spacing, and their weapons were carried in ready positions, but their expressions betrayed comfortable routine rather than tactical vigilance. The first soldiers entered the initial capture zone, their boots crunching softly on the leaf-covered forest floor. Clara counted silently, watching as more of the patrol filtered into position. Timing was critical. They needed enough men in the zone for the first phase to be effective, but had to trigger before the lead elements passed through to the next section. When approximately 15 soldiers had entered the first zone, Clara gave a short nod to Cooper. "Now," she whispered. Cooper pulled the primary trigger cord. The forest erupted into sudden, controlled chaos. Hidden ropes sprang from beneath the leaf cover, wrapping around the soldiers' legs and torsos in a complex web of hemp. The men shouted in alarm, some reaching for weapons, others simply frozen in shock. Before they could organize any response, the second phase activated automatically, further securing their upper bodies and effectively neutralizing any threat. The commotion alerted the soldiers in the second section of the patrol. Clara saw their momentary confusion, the critical window for the next trigger. "Section 2, she ordered, and Whitley pulled the secondary trigger cord. Another segment of the forest came alive with whipping ropes and deploying restraints. The second group of soldiers, still processing what was happening to their comrades ahead, found themselves similarly ensnared before they could retreat or mount any defense. "Final section," Clara commanded, and Marcel, positioned at their left, activated the third trigger. The remainder of the patrol, including Major Stryker himself, were captured in the third web of ropes. Within 30 seconds, the entire German patrol, 42 soldiers in total, had been immobilized without a single shot fired. Clara could hardly believe the effectiveness of her design. The theory had translated to practice with remarkable accuracy. The German soldiers struggled against their restraints, shouting in confusion and anger, but the system held firm. each movement only tightening the interconnected web of ropes. Captain Whitley's expression was one of undisguised amazement. "Incredible," he murmured. "Absolutely incredible." He raised his hand, giving the signal for the resistance fighters to move in and secure the prisoners. Emerging from their hiding places throughout the forest, the Belgian resistance members approached the captured Germans. They moved with practiced efficiency, collecting weapons and establishing a perimeter. The fear that had initially gripped the resistance fighters, the fear of facing 42 armed enemy soldiers, had been replaced by cautious confidence. Clara stepped out from the command position, moving toward the central section where Major Stryker was secured. The German officer's face was a mask of fury and disbelief as he surveyed his immobilized command. "Was das?" he demanded, struggling against the ropes that bound him. "What kind of trickery is this?" Clara straightened her OSS uniform as she approached, conscious of the surprise registering on the German officer's face as he realized a woman, and an African-American woman at that, appeared to be in command. "This, Major Stryker," she replied in perfect German, "is applied physics." The process of securing the prisoners took nearly an hour. Each German soldier was carefully extricated from the rope system, only to be immediately restrained with conventional bindings. They were then assembled in a clearing away from the trap site, under heavy guard while the resistance leadership determined the next steps. Captain Whitley conferred with Marcel and the other resistance leaders, occasionally glancing toward the captured Germans. Clara busied herself documenting the operation, making detailed notes on the performance of each trap component for future refinement. "The rendezvous with the Allied transport units is confirmed for 2200 hours, Whitley announced, returning to Clara's position. "That gives us approximately 7 hours to move the prisoners to the extraction point." Clara nodded, closing her notebook. The trap performed even better than projected. Deployment time was 12% faster than our calculations predicted, and the retention rate was 100%. No injuries beyond minor rope abrasions. Whitley smiled. Always the scientist, even in victory. His expression grew more serious. "You realize what you've accomplished here, don't you? 42 enemy combatants captured without casualties on either side. That's unprecedented." "The science was sound," Clara replied simply, though she couldn't entirely suppress her pride. "It's more than that," Whitley insisted. "This operation changes our entire approach. Conventional wisdom says you need superior firepower or numerical advantage to capture enemy personnel. You've just demonstrated an alternative that could save countless lives." As they spoke, Cooper approached with a message from the guards. "Captain Major Stryker is requesting to speak with the commanding officer." Whitley exchanged glances with Clara. "Well, Lieutenant, this is your operation. Care to hear what the Major has to say?" Clara hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, sir, I would." They found Stryker sitting rigidly on a fallen log, his uniform disheveled, but his bearing still unmistakably that of a career officer. His cold blue eyes fixed on Clara as she approached. "So," he said in accented English, "you are the architect of this humiliation." "I'm responsible for the capture operation, yes," Clara replied evenly. Stryker's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. A woman could not have designed such a system." Clara met his gaze without flinching. "And yet here we are." The German officer studied her for a long moment. "What happens to my men now?" "They'll be transported to Allied territory as prisoners of war," Captain Whitley interjected. "They'll be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention." Stryker's attention remained fixed on Clara. "You could have killed us. A simple ambush would have been more conventional." "That would have been wasteful," Clara replied. "Unnecessarily so." A mixture of emotions crossed the German officer's face, confusion, anger, and something harder to identify, perhaps a reluctant respect. "Curious," he finally said. "The High Command tells us that Americans are bloodthirsty savages, especially the colored ones." He gestured toward Clara. "Yet here you devise an elaborate trap specifically to avoid bloodshed." Clara felt Whitley stiffen beside her at the racial remark, but she maintained her composure. "Perhaps you should question more of what your High Command tells you, Major." As they walked away, leaving Stryker to contemplate this exchange, Whitley spoke in a low voice. "You handled that remarkably well." Clara shrugged. "I've heard worse in Philadelphia." The afternoon sun filtered through the forest canopy as preparations continued for the prisoners' transport. The resistance fighters had established a temporary holding area, with guards posted at regular intervals. Most of the Germans had accepted their capture with military stoicism, though a few of the younger soldiers appeared visibly relieved that they were being treated humanely. Clara was inspecting the disassembly of the trap system when Elise approached with a canteen of water. The Belgian woman's dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her expression one of undisguised admiration. "The men are calling it Clara's Web," she said, handing over the canteen. Already the story is spreading to other resistance cells. Clara accepted the water gratefully. "I hope they're focusing on the engineering rather than the engineer." Elise shook her head, smiling. "How you Americans, always so modest when you should be proud." She gestured toward the prisoners. "Look at what you've accomplished. 42 of the occupiers captured without a drop of blood spilled. This is not just a tactical victory, it's a moral one." Before Clara could respond, Cooper hurried toward them, his expression urgent. "Lieutenant, you need to come quickly. One of the prisoners, he's asking for you specifically." Clara followed Cooper to the holding area, where a young German corporal stood separated from the main group of prisoners. He couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, with a thin face and nervous eyes. "This is Corporal Weber," Cooper explained. "Says he has information he'll only share with you." Clara approached the young soldier cautiously. "I'm Lieutenant Jenkins. You asked to speak with me." The corporal glanced around, as if afraid of being overheard by his fellow Germans. "The way you captured us," he said in halting English. "No shooting, no one hurt." He swallowed hard. "I want to help you." Clara exchanged surprised looks with Cooper. "Help us how, Corporal?" "I know things," Weber continued. "Important things, about troop movements, supply depots." He lowered his voice further, "about what they're doing to people in the East." Clara maintained a neutral expression, though her pulse quickened at the potential intelligence opportunity. "Why would you share this information with us?" The young German's eyes darted toward Major Stryker, who sat some distance away under guard. "Not all of us believe in what Germany has become," he whispered. "Some of us were given no choice." Clara nodded slowly. "Wait here, Corporal. I need to consult with my commanding officer." She quickly located Captain Whitley and relayed the conversation. The captain's expression grew increasingly interested as she spoke. "A potential defector," he mused. "That would be an unexpected bonus from this operation." "He seems genuinely willing to cooperate," Clara said. "Something about our non-lethal approach appears to have influenced him." Whitley considered this. "It's possible that your Athena's web accomplished something beyond physical capture, Jenkins. Psychological capture as well." As the sun began to set over the Ardennes, casting long shadows through the ancient forest, Clara found herself reflecting on the day's events. What had begun as a theoretical exercise in applied physics had evolved into something far more significant. Beyond the tactical success of capturing 42 enemy soldiers without bloodshed, there was the unexpected human element, the impact of mercy on both captor and captive. Major Stryker had requested another conversation before the prisoners were transported. This time, his demeanor was noticeably different, less arrogant, more contemplative. "In training," he said without preamble, "they teach us that the enemy is always brutal, that mercy is weakness." He met Clara's gaze directly. "Today has given me much to reconsider." Clara wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability from the German officer. Before she could formulate a reply, Stryker continued. "Your name, Lieutenant, I would remember it." "Jenkins," she answered. "Clara Jenkins." Stryker nodded slowly. "When this war ends, Lieutenant Jenkins, and it will end, remember that a single act can change more than a battlefield. It can change a mind." As twilight deepened into night, the resistance fighters began the careful process of moving the prisoners toward the extraction point. Clara supervised the final dismantling of the trap system, ensuring that key components were salvaged for potential future use. Captain Whitley had already radioed headquarters with news of the operation's success, receiving enthusiastic commendation in return. "They're calling this a textbook example of innovative field tactics," Whitley told Clara as they walked along the forest path. "HQ wants complete documentation for training purposes." Clara smiled, adjusting her pack. "I'll have my report ready by tomorrow." "Make it detailed," Whitley advised. "This goes beyond a single successful operation, Jenkins. What you've developed here could save countless lives on both sides." As they reached the edge of the forest, Clara paused to look back at the darkened trees that had been the setting for her unlikely triumph. A physics teacher from Philadelphia had transformed a Belgian forest into a demonstration of how science and compassion could change the nature of warfare itself. The night air carried the distant sounds of the prisoner convoy moving through the forest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new applications of her unlikely expertise in this terrible conflict. But for tonight, Clara allowed herself to feel the quiet satisfaction of having proven what she had always believed: that intelligence could overcome brute force, and that victory didn't always require violence. What neither Clara nor anyone else in the Allied forces could know was that this single operation would have ramifications far beyond the capture of 42 German soldiers. The ripples from Athena's web would spread in unexpected directions, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways that would only become clear as the war progressed toward its inevitable conclusion. Dawn broke over the Allied forward operating base near Liège, with thin rays of sunlight piercing the autumn fog. Clara Jenkins sat at a wooden table in the command tent, meticulously finalizing her report on Operation Athena's Web. Around her, the base hummed with activity, as intelligence officers processed the information gleaned from the captured German soldiers. The operation had yielded far more than just prisoners. It had provided a treasure trove of tactical intelligence that was already being disseminated to Allied units throughout the region. Captain Whitley entered the tent, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His normally stern expression had softened somewhat over the past 24 hours, replaced by what Clara recognized as professional respect. "Headquarters can't stop talking about your operation," he said, placing one of the mugs beside her notes. "General Harrison himself is flying in this afternoon to meet you." Clara looked up in surprise. "The general is coming here because of Athena's Web?" "Not just because of the capture itself," Whitley explained, taking a seat across from her. "It's the intelligence from Corporal Weber that's causing the real stir. His information about supply depots and troop movements has already been verified by aerial reconnaissance. Apparently, he wasn't exaggerating about what he knows." Clara took a sip of the coffee, wincing slightly at its bitter strength. "Have the other prisoners been as cooperative?" "Not to the same degree, but several have provided useful information. Your young corporal seems to have inspired a few others to be more forthcoming." Whitley leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's something else. Intelligence is particularly interested in what Weber revealed about the research facility near Dusseldorf." Clara's interest sharpened. "What kind of research facility?" "Some sort of scientific installation. Weber didn't have direct access, but he transported supplies there several times. Says they're working on long-range weapon systems, potentially something that could reach England." This news sent Clara's mind racing. As a physicist, she understood the theoretical possibilities of such weapons and their potential devastating impact if successfully deployed. "Weber has agreed to draw schematics of everything he saw," Whitley continued, "but he insists on working with you directly, says he trusts you because of how the capture was conducted, no bloodshed." Clara nodded slowly, understanding the psychological impact of their non-violent approach. "Sometimes how you treat your enemy determines whether they remain your enemy, Captain." The arrival of General Harrison later that day transformed the normally austere forward base. Staff officers scurried about, ensuring everything was presentable for the high-ranking visitor. Clara, however, remained focused on her work, interviewing Corporal Weber and documenting his technical observations about the mysterious research facility. The young German soldier proved to have an excellent memory for detail. Though not scientifically trained, he had noticed significant elements during his deliveries: unusual power requirements, specialized equipment, and most tellingly, the presence of several prominent German physicists whom he recognized from propaganda newsreels. They spoke of something called Project Donnerschlag, Project Thunderclap, Weber explained as Clara made careful notes. The scientists argued often about delivery systems and range calculations. And you're certain they mentioned England specifically as a target? Clara asked. Weber nodded solemnly. London. They said the first demonstration would target London to force a surrender. Before Clara could ask further questions, the tent flap opened and Captain Whitley entered, his posture rigid with military formality. Lieutenant Jenkins, General Harrison has requested your presence in the command center immediately. Clara gathered her notes. We'll continue this later, she told Weber, who nodded respectfully. The command center was housed in what had once been a small schoolhouse at the edge of the Allied camp. As Clara entered, she was struck by the contrast between the childish drawings still pinned to the walls and the grim-faced military officers hunched over maps and communication equipment. General William Harrison cut an imposing figure at the center of the room. At 58, with silver hair and a chest full of medals from 2 world wars, he embodied the traditional military leadership that had initially been so skeptical of Clara's unconventional approaches. Lieutenant Jenkins, the general acknowledged as she saluted. I've been reading about your innovative capture operation. 42 enemy personnel without firing a shot. That's remarkable work. Thank you, sir, Clara replied, maintaining her professional demeanor despite her surprise at the warm reception. Captain Whitley tells me you designed the entire system yourself, based on applied physics principles? Yes, sir. My background is in theoretical and applied physics. I simply adapted those principles to the tactical situation. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. And now we have this intelligence about a potential long-range weapons program. He gestured toward the maps spread across the table. What's your assessment of the German corporal's information? Clara considered her response carefully. Based on the technical details he's provided, I believe his information is credible, sir. The power requirements he described are consistent with what would be needed for certain types of advanced propulsion systems, and the materials being delivered to the facility suggest sophisticated guidance mechanisms. In other words, they could actually have a weapon capable of striking London. It's theoretically possible, sir. The Germans have already demonstrated advanced rocketry with their V1 and V2 programs. This Thunderclap project could represent a significant evolution of those technologies. The general exchanged glances with his intelligence officer. Then we have a situation that requires immediate attention. He turned back to Clara. Lieutenant, I'm forming a special task force to investigate this threat and develop countermeasures. Given your scientific background and the rapport you've established with Corporal Weber, I want you to join this unit as technical advisor. Clara blinked in surprise. Sir, I'm honored, but my current assignment with the OSS has already been amended, Harrison interrupted. Captain Whitley will continue the resistance support operations here. Your expertise is needed elsewhere now. The general's expression softened slightly. Unless you have objections to the reassignment. No, sir, Clara replied, recognizing both the importance of the mission and the rare opportunity being presented to her. When do I begin? Immediately. You'll be working with Colonel James Donovan's team. They're assembling at our research facility outside London. Harrison checked his watch. Transport leaves at 1600 hours. I suggest you prepare quickly, Lieutenant. As Clara departed to gather her few possessions, Captain Whitley fell into step beside her. Quite a promotion, he remarked. From field operations to strategic research in less than 48 hours. Clara smiled wryly. Hardly feels like a promotion when you consider the stakes. If this German weapon is real, then you'll be the one to help stop it, Whitley finished for her. He extended his hand. It's been an honor working with you, Lieutenant Jenkins. You've changed my thinking about a few things. Clara shook his hand firmly. The honor was mine, Captain, and thank you for giving my theoretical ideas a chance in the field. The flight to England aboard a military transport plane gave Clara time to organize her thoughts and review her notes from the Weber interviews. The young German corporal had been transferred to the same transport, his cooperation earning him special status among the prisoners. He sat across from Clara, his thin face tense but determined. I never thought I would be flying to England, he remarked as the plane droned over the channel. except perhaps as part of a bomber crew. Life takes unexpected turns during war, Clara replied, studying the technical diagrams he had drawn. These power configurations, they seem excessive for conventional rocketry. Weber nodded. The scientists complained constantly about power supply problems. They said conventional batteries were insufficient for the guidance systems. And these components here, Clara pointed to a section of the drawing, you're certain about their dimensions? As certain as I can be. I helped unload the crates personally. The scientists were very particular about handling procedures. Clara fell silent, her mind working through the implications. If the Germans had indeed developed what these schematics suggested, the threat to London and potentially other Allied cities was severe. But something about the design nagged at her. There was an inefficiency in the supposed configuration, an almost deliberate flaw that a competent engineer would have corrected. The research facility outside London turned out to be a converted country estate, its elegant facade now obscured by military vehicles and security checkpoints. Colonel James Donovan, the task force leader, met Clara and Weber at the entrance, a compact man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Lieutenant Jenkins," he greeted her, "we've heard impressive things about your work in Belgium, and this must be Corporal Weber." He nodded to the young German. "Your cooperation is appreciated and will be taken into consideration when this conflict ends." Weber acknowledged this with a respectful nod. "We've assembled a team of our top scientific minds," Donovan continued, leading them through the mansion's grand entrance hall, now filled with desks and communications equipment. Physicists, engineers, intelligence analysts, all focused on understanding and neutralizing this thunderclap threat. He showed them to a large room that had once been a library. Bookshelves still lined the walls, but the central space was dominated by drafting tables, blackboards covered in equations, and several scale models of what appeared to be advanced rocket designs. "This is where you'll be working," Donovan explained. "Your quarters are upstairs in what used to be the servants' wing, not luxurious but comfortable enough." Clara surveyed the room, taking in the various ongoing projects. "When do I meet the rest of the team?" "They're gathering for a briefing in 30 minutes. Until then, feel free to get acquainted with the facility." Donovan checked his watch. "I have to brief London HQ, so if you'll excuse me." After the colonel departed, Clara approached one of the blackboards, studying the equations written there. They represented advanced trajectory calculations for long-range ballistics, similar to work she had studied at university, but with practical military applications. "Impressive, isn't it?" came a voice from behind her. Clara turned to find a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses and prematurely graying hair. He extended his hand. "Dr. Richard Harlow, Theoretical Physics. You must be Lieutenant Jenkins. Word of your capture operation preceded you." Clara shook his hand. "News travels fast." "Especially good news," Harlow replied with a smile. 42 prisoners without firing a shot. That's the kind of innovation we need more of." He gestured toward Weber, who stood awkwardly nearby. "And this is our cooperative corporal, I presume?" Weber straightened slightly. "Joseph Weber, formerly of the Siebte Company, 243. Regiment." Harlow nodded approvingly. "Your English is excellent, Corporal. That will be helpful." More team members began to arrive for the briefing, each introducing themselves to Clara and regarding Weber with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. The group included 2 additional physicists, 3 intelligence analysts, a communications expert, and a meteorologist whose specialty, Clara would later learn, was calculating how weather conditions might affect the trajectory of long-range weapons. Colonel Donovan returned precisely at the scheduled time, accompanied by an older civilian, wearing an impeccably tailored suit. The colonel called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, for those who haven't met him, this is Sir Malcolm Blackwood from the Prime Minister's Scientific Advisory Committee. He'll be our liaison with the War Cabinet." Sir Malcolm surveyed the room with keen eyes. "I won't waste time with pleasantries. If this German thunderclap weapon is real, London faces a threat potentially more devastating than the Blitz. We need to understand it and neutralize it quickly." He moved to a large map of Northern Europe pinned to one wall. "Based on intelligence from Corporal Weber and aerial reconnaissance, We believe the research facility is located here, approximately 20 kilometers northeast of Dusseldorf. It's heavily guarded, and according to our sources, the project is nearing completion. Clara raised her hand. Sir, having reviewed Weber's technical information, I have some questions about the weapon's design. There appear to be inconsistencies in the power distribution system that would seriously compromise its effectiveness. Sir Malcolm turned to her with interest. What kind of inconsistencies, Lieutenant? The guidance system he's described would require significantly more power than the supply components could provide. It's a fundamental flaw that German scientists would surely have addressed. The room fell silent as the implications of this observation sank in. Colonel Donovan was the first to speak. Are you suggesting the information is deliberately misleading? Clara glanced at Weber, whose expression had grown worried. Not necessarily. Corporal Weber has reported what he observed, but as a transport driver, he wouldn't have been privy to the complete technical specifications. It's possible the components he saw were only part of a larger system, or perhaps intended for a different purpose entirely. Dr. Harlow moved to the blackboard. If I may. He quickly sketched a modified version of the power system. What if the configuration is actually something like this? It would address the power distribution problems and potentially explain the unusual components Weber described. Clara studied the diagram, her mind racing through the physics. That would actually work, and it would make the weapon considerably more dangerous than we initially thought. The briefing continued for another 2 hours, with the team dissecting every piece of intelligence about Project Thunderclap. By the end, they had developed a preliminary model of what the German weapon might be, a long-range rocket with an advanced guidance system that could potentially target specific buildings in London with unprecedented accuracy. As the meeting adjourned, Colonel Donovan asked Clara and Dr. Harlow to remain behind. I need your honest assessment, he said once the others had left. How serious is this threat, and how quickly can we develop countermeasures? Harlow and Clara exchanged glances before she spoke. Based on what we know now, sir, if the Germans have solved the guidance problem, they could potentially launch within weeks. As for countermeasures, we need more information about the specific tracking and propulsion systems they're using. Which means we need eyes inside that facility, Donovan concluded grimly. Intelligence is working on infiltration options, but it's a heavily secured area. Clara hesitated, then offered, Sir, I may have an alternative approach, something based on the same principles as Operation Athena's web, but adapted for intelligence gathering rather than capture. Donovan's eyebrows rose. I'm listening, Lieutenant. Over the next 3 days, Clara worked almost continuously, developing what she called Operation Hermes, named for the messenger of the Greek gods. The concept combined her physics expertise with practical field techniques learned during her time with the OSS. The plan centered on a sophisticated listening device that could be deployed near the German research facility, capable of detecting and recording the electromagnetic signatures produced by various equipment. These signatures could potentially reveal critical information about the weapon's capabilities without requiring physical infiltration of the facility. Dr. Harlow proved to be an invaluable collaborator, his theoretical knowledge complementing Clara's practical approach. Together, they designed a system that could be transported in components, assembled in the field, and operated remotely. The challenge, Harlow explained during their presentation to Colonel Donovan and Sir Malcolm, is getting the equipment close enough to the facility without detection. It needs to be within 500 meters to capture the relevant data. And that's where Corporal Weber's knowledge becomes essential, Clara added. He knows the patrol patterns, security protocols, and, most importantly, the terrain surrounding the facility. Weber, who had been included in the planning sessions, nodded in confirmation. There is a forested area to the north of the complex. The patrols are less frequent there because of the difficult terrain. With proper timing, equipment could be placed without detection. Colonel Donovan studied the proposed operation plans. Who would deploy this equipment? We can't send a regular combat team into that area without risking detection. Clara and Harlow exchanged glances before she answered. A small team, sir. 2 or 3 people at most, with the technical knowledge to set up the equipment properly. I would volunteer to lead it. Sir Malcolm looked up sharply. "You're proposing to go into German territory yourself, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir. I designed the equipment and understand its requirements better than anyone. And with respect to our other technical personnel, I also have field experience with the OSS." A heavy silence fell over the room as the senior officers considered this proposal. Finally, Colonel Donovan spoke. "It's unorthodox, but then again, so was your rope trap operation, and that succeeded beyond expectations." He turned to Sir Malcolm. "What does the War Cabinet say?" The older man's face was grave. "The Prime Minister has made it clear that stopping this thunderclap threat is our highest priority. If Lieutenant Jenkins believes this is our best approach, I'm inclined to support it." Preparations for Operation Hermes began immediately. The technical components were assembled and tested in the facility's workshops, while intelligence gathered detailed maps and aerial photographs of the target area. Clara worked with a small team to design specialized containers that would allow the sensitive equipment to be transported safely through hostile territory. Corporal Weber proved increasingly valuable, providing insights into German patrol procedures and helping identify the optimal location for the listening devices. His commitment to the Allied cause seemed to strengthen with each passing day. "Why are you doing this?" Clara asked him one evening as they reviewed security protocols. "You're risking execution as a traitor if you're captured." Weber was silent for a moment before responding. "I joined the army because I had no choice. But what I saw in the occupied territories, what German soldiers were ordered to do to civilians," he shook his head. "That is not the country I thought I was serving." He met Clara's gaze directly. "And then there was how you captured us. No shooting, no one hurt. It made me think perhaps there is another way to be in this war." 4 days later, the operation was ready. The team would consist of Clara, Dr. Harlow, whose expertise would be crucial for calibrating the equipment in the field, and a British Special Operations Executive Agent named Michael Foster, who knew the region from previous missions. Corporal Weber would accompany them to the drop point, but remain with the extraction team. His presence in Germany deemed too risky given his status as a defector. The night before their departure, Clara found herself unable to sleep. She walked the grounds of the research facility, the cool night air filled with the scent of distant rain. The enormity of the mission weighed heavily on her mind, not just the personal risk, but the potential consequences for London if they failed. She was surprised to find Dr. Harlow similarly restless, sitting on a bench overlooking what had once been the estate's formal gardens. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, joining him. He offered a rueful smile. "First field mission jitters, I suppose." "I've spent my career in laboratories and lecture halls. Parachuting into hostile territory is somewhat outside my usual professional activities." Clara laughed softly. "If it helps, I felt the same way before my first operation in Belgium. The theory is always cleaner than the practice." "That's what makes your work so remarkable," Harlow said, turning to face her. "You bridge that gap between theory and application. Most physicists never see their equations save lives in the field." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Harlow spoke again. "May I ask you something, Lieutenant? Something personal?" "Clara, please. And yes, you may. How did you manage it, becoming a physicist, joining the OSS, as a woman, and an African-American woman at that? The obstacles must have been considerable," Clara finished for him. "They are." She looked up at the stars, gathering her thoughts. "My father was a mathematics teacher. He taught me that equations don't care about the color of the hand that writes them, or whether that hand belongs to a man or a woman. Truth is truth." She smiled at a distant memory. "When I was 12, he gave me a biography of Marie Curie. I decided then that if a Polish woman could win 2 Nobel Prizes, I could certainly become a physicist. The war interrupted my doctoral studies, but afterward," she trailed off, then shrugged. "One step at a time, I suppose." Harlow nodded thoughtfully. "The world is changing. It must change after all this." He gestured vaguely toward Europe, Perhaps one of the few good things to come from this terrible conflict will be the recognition that talent and courage come in all forms. Perhaps, Clara agreed, though her tone suggested she harbored fewer illusions about how quickly such change might come. The mission departed before dawn the following morning. A modified RAF bomber transported the team to the drop zone, a remote area approximately 15 kilometers from the German research facility. The parachute descent occurred without incident, and by mid-morning, Clara, Harlow, and Foster had established a temporary base in an abandoned forester's cabin deep in the woods. The listening equipment had survived the drop intact, thanks to the specialized containers Clara had designed. As Harlow began assembling the components, Foster secured the perimeter and established communication with their extraction team. "We have 48 hours before the scheduled pickup," he informed them, checking his watch. "That gives us 1 day to position the equipment and collect initial data, and 1 day to retrieve it and return to the extraction point." Clara nodded, studying their maps. "According to Weber's information, the optimal listening position is here, approximately 400 meters from the facility's power plant. We should be able to reach it by nightfall if we maintain a steady pace." The journey through the dense German forest was tense but uneventful. They moved carefully, avoiding roads and open areas, guided by Foster's wilderness expertise and Weber's detailed descriptions of the terrain. By late afternoon, they had reached the final approach to their target position, a ridge overlooking the research facility. From their vantage point, the Thunderclap installation was clearly visible. A complex of buildings surrounded by high fences, guard towers, and what appeared to be extensive anti-aircraft defenses. Even at this distance, the activity was evident. Trucks moving between buildings, guards patrolling the perimeter, scientists in white coats crossing between laboratories. "Quite an operation," Foster murmured, observing through binoculars. Weber wasn't exaggerating about the security. Clara studied the layout, comparing it to their intelligence briefings. "The main power plant is that building there, with the tall smokestacks. And based on the electromagnetic equipment we brought, the testing area should be in that large structure to the east." As darkness fell, they made their final approach to the listening position. Harlow carried the core components of the device, while Clara managed the sensitive calibration equipment. Foster moved ahead, ensuring their path remained clear of patrols. The listening post was established in a small clearing, concealed by thick undergrowth. Working by the dim light of a covered flashlight, Clara and Harlow assembled the sophisticated equipment. The device consisted of multiple sensors designed to detect various electromagnetic frequencies, connected to recording equipment that would store the data for later analysis. "Power systems online," Harlow whispered, checking the indicators. "Beginning calibration sequence." Clara adjusted the sensitive receivers, orienting them toward the facility. "I'm detecting significant electromagnetic activity already. Multiple power sources consistent with major research operations." For the next several hours, they monitored the incoming data, making minor adjustments to improve reception. The patterns they observed confirmed their theories about Project Thunderclap. The facility was indeed working with advanced guidance systems that could potentially direct missiles with unprecedented accuracy. "Look at these power fluctuations." Clara pointed to a pattern on one of their instruments. "They're testing something big, drawing massive current in regular intervals." Harlow nodded grimly. "Launch simulations, most likely. The pattern is consistent with the power demands of large rocket engines during ignition sequences." By dawn, they had collected substantial data, enough to begin forming a clear picture of the German weapons' capabilities. The recordings were carefully packed for transport, and the team prepared to withdraw to their temporary base. The return journey proceeded smoothly until mid-afternoon, when Foster suddenly raised his hand in warning. The team froze, taking cover behind a fallen tree as a German patrol passed less than 50 meters away. For 10 tense minutes, they remained motionless, the precious data secured in Clara's pack until the danger had passed. "That was too close," Foster whispered as they resumed their careful retreat. "We need to alter our route back to the extraction point." The detour added hours to their journey, forcing them to navigate unfamiliar terrain as darkness fell again. Despite the challenges, they reached the Foresters' cabin shortly after midnight, exhausted but with their mission objectives accomplished. While Foster established contact with the extraction team to confirm the pickup, Clara and Harlow conducted a preliminary analysis of the collected data. What they found was both fascinating and alarming. These guidance signatures, Clara said, pointing to a particular frequency pattern. They're unlike anything in our current understanding of missile technology. The Germans have developed something truly innovative here. Harlow studied the readings with growing concern. If I'm interpreting this correctly, they're not just aiming for London generally. They could potentially target specific buildings with this system. Whitehall, Westminster, power stations. Clara nodded slowly. But there's something else. She highlighted another pattern in the data. These power fluctuations during the test sequences, they're irregular, suggesting instability in the system. A flaw we could potentially exploit. Possibly. But we'll need the full research team at the facility to analyze this properly. Their extraction the following morning went according to plan. An OSS team met them at the designated location and escorted them to a small airfield where a plane waited to return them to England. Within hours, they were back at the research facility outside London, presenting their findings to an eager audience of scientists and military officials. Colonel Donovan and Sir Malcolm listened intently as Clara and Harlow explained what they had discovered. The data confirmed the existence of Project Thunderclap and provided crucial details about its capabilities and potential vulnerabilities. Based on what we've learned, Clara concluded, the German weapon represents a significant threat to London. However, the guidance system exhibits instabilities that could be exploited to disrupt its targeting capabilities. How would we do that? Sir Malcolm asked. Dr. Harlow stepped forward. We believe a specialized jamming system could be developed, one that mimics and amplifies the instabilities we detected. In effect, we would be using the weapon's own weaknesses against it. How quickly could such a system be ready? Colonel Donovan pressed. Clara and Harlow exchanged glances. With adequate resources, she replied, we could have a prototype within 2 weeks. Deployment would depend on how the jamming devices are to be positioned. The following days saw the research facility transform into a hive of activity. Additional scientists and engineers were brought in, working in shifts to develop the jamming technology Clara and Harlow had proposed. Clara found herself at the center of the effort, her unique combination of theoretical knowledge and practical field experience proving invaluable. The breakthrough came 9 days into the project. After numerous failed attempts, Clara identified a specific frequency pattern that could disrupt the German guidance system without requiring excessive power, making the jammers smaller and more easily deployable. It's elegant, Dr. Harlow remarked as they tested the prototype. Rather than brute-forcing a countermeasure, you've essentially created a whisper that the German system will mistake for a shout. Sometimes the smallest interventions create the largest effects, Clara replied. My physics professor used to say that nature prefers efficiency. As the jamming devices moved into production, Colonel Donovan informed the team that intelligence sources had detected increased activity at the German facility. Project Thunderclap appeared to be entering its final testing phase, with a potential deployment window of less than 3 weeks. The Allied response plan took shape quickly. Dozens of the compact jamming devices would be positioned throughout London, creating an electromagnetic shield over the city. Additional units would be deployed to other potential targets, including key military installations and industrial centers. 2 days before the projected completion of the jamming network, alarming news arrived from intelligence sources. The first Thunderclap missiles had been moved to launch positions near the Dutch border. The German weapon was no longer theoretical, it was primed and ready to strike. London accelerated preparations, installing the final jamming units and conducting emergency tests of the defensive network. Clara worked almost continuously, fine-tuning the system and training operators on proper calibration procedures. On the evening of the anticipated first launch, Clara found herself in a command bunker beneath Whitehall, alongside Dr. Harlow, Colonel Donovan, and various military and government officials. The atmosphere was tense as they monitored reports from observer posts along the Channel coast. Radar stations reporting multiple launches from Sector 4, came the announcement at 22:47. Estimated time to impact 12 minutes. Clara moved to the monitoring equipment that tracked the jamming network's performance. All units operating at optimal levels, signal integrity at 97%. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Radar operators provided continuous updates as the German missiles crossed the channel. Initial trajectories indicated central London as the target, with government buildings as the likely focus. Missiles entering jamming field perimeter now, an operator announced. 5 minutes to projected impact. Clara watched the instruments intently, noting with satisfaction that the jammers were functioning exactly as designed. The interference patterns matched their predictions, creating a disruptive field that should confuse the German guidance systems. Trajectory change detected, came the suddenly excited voice of a radar operator. Missiles are deviating from course. Repeat, missiles are deviating. The room held its collective breath as the tracking continued. When the final report came in, it was met with stunned silence followed by spontaneous applause. All 4 German missiles had fallen harmlessly into the Thames estuary, miles from their intended targets. The jamming system had worked perfectly. In the days that followed, additional Thunderclap launches were attempted, each with the same result. Not a single missile reached its target, rendering the German wonder weapon effectively useless. Within 2 weeks, Allied bombing raids had destroyed the research facility and production sites, ending the Thunderclap threat permanently. For Clara Jenkins, the success brought recognition that would have been unimaginable before the war. Her non-violent capture method from Operation Athena's Web was incorporated into OSS and later CIA training protocols. The jamming technology she developed to counter Project Thunderclap became the foundation for electronic countermeasures that would influence military technology for decades to come. When victory in Europe was finally declared in May 1945, Clara found herself attending a small private reception at Downing Street. Prime Minister Churchill himself shook her hand, remarking that her contributions had saved countless lives. "Not just through the technologies you developed, Lieutenant Jenkins," he said, "but through demonstrating that even in war, humanity and intellect can triumph over brute force. A lesson I hope we all carry forward into the peace." After the war, Clara completed her doctoral studies at the University of Pennsylvania, becoming one of the first African-American women to earn a PhD in physics. Her wartime innovations, though classified for many years, eventually influenced fields ranging from telecommunications to medical imaging. In 1969, as the world watched astronauts walk on the moon, Dr. Clara Jenkins, by then a respected professor and researcher, received a letter from an unexpected source. Joseph Weber, the German corporal whose cooperation had helped save London from Project Thunderclap. "As I watch humanity reach the stars," he wrote, "I am reminded of that moment in the Belgian forest when your ropes fell from the trees. You taught me that capture need not mean destruction, that enemies can become allies, and that the finest victories are those that preserve rather than destroy. These lessons have guided my life in the years since our paths crossed." Perhaps the most significant legacy of Clara's wartime innovations was not technological but philosophical, the demonstration that non-violence could be not merely moral but effective, that ingenuity could overcome brutality, that the physics teacher from Philadelphia had changed not just the course of battles, but the way people thought about conflict itself. Decades later, military historians would cite Operations Athena's Web and Hermes as pivotal moments in the evolution of modern warfare, points where science, humanity, and strategic thinking converged to create approaches that valued intelligence over force and preservation over destruction. Clara Jenkins never sought recognition for her contributions. When interviewed for a war history project in 1972, she simply said, "I did what anyone would have done with the knowledge I had. The principles of physics are universal. They work the same for everyone. I just had the opportunity to apply them when it mattered most." Her story remained relatively unknown to the public for decades, classified under national security protocols until the 1990s. By then, Many of the innovations she pioneered had become standard practice in military and civilian applications alike, their origins obscured by time and the natural evolution of technology. But for those who knew, the resistance fighters in the Belgian forest, the scientists who worked alongside her in England, and the German soldiers whose lives were spared by ropes rather than bullets, Clara Jenkins represented something profound, the possibility that even in humanity's darkest hours, intelligence, compassion, and courage could prevail over hatred and destruction. Her legacy lives on not just in the technologies she developed, but in the example she set, that a single individual, armed with knowledge and conviction, can change the course of history without firing a shot. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.